So hello everyone and welcome at the first panel of the Monkey Week conference in Seville. My name is Jaša Bužinel and I'm a music journalist and also a curator and like freelancer in the music sector, and I'm going to be hosting today's panel in which we'll discuss and mostly focus on the state of contemporary music journalism, but we'll also maybe look a bit at the past to see how it developed and what happened throughout the years. I'd also like to welcome everyone who's following us via YouTube, via the stream. And I think that at the end, if we'll have some time, we'll also have some questions from the audience and also from the people online, but we'll see because we're a bit late and sorry for the delay. But yeah, first of all, I'd like to introduce my guests today. On my right, Shawn Reynaldo, a very prominent voice in the electronic music scene. Then we have Carlos Pérez de Ziriza, another prominent journalist. He's one of the biggest voices on the Spanish scene. And then on my furthest right, the legendary José Miguel Carrasco, really an influential figure for the Seville and Andalusian music scene. So since we're a bit late, I'd like to start with a simple question, but maybe we shouldn't get into details, but I'd really like to know why and how did you get involved in the music scene first, and then later basically in music journalism. Maybe if we start with you, Shawn.
I mean, hello? Okay, yeah, here we go. Getting involved in music, gosh, I don't know, I guess when I was a teenager, I really liked grunge music, and then from there just kind of ended up figuring out about like punk and indie music and raves, and started going to all this stuff because I wanted something to do. And then while I was in college and university, I started working in radio, and I worked in radio for like 10 years. And eventually I started blogging when that was a thing, around like 2007. And from there transitioned into becoming like a proper music journalist. And since then I've worked at a bunch of different publications and now pretty much just do my own thing.
In my case, I knew I wanted to be a journalist since I was 13 years old, more or less. But I never imagined that I would be a music journalist. I mean, I studied the degree in journalism, but I wasn't expecting to do this. But I guess it was something natural. I think it's better, I mean, I think you are better doing whatever makes you more passionate. I mean, if you have passion for something, in theory, you are going to write better in this subject than in another. So I guess it was something natural, and I could have been dedicating myself to maybe any kind of journalism, but I ended up here. I don't know how, really.
Pues yo empecé en la prensa musical de casualidad, porque yo nunca estudié periodismo ni nada que tuviera que ver con las letras. Yo en realidad soy ingeniero electrónico y con lo que he trabajado siempre ha sido con máquinas de diálisis, con electromedicina.
Well, first of all, my name is Emilio. I'm going to help with translation with José Miguel. And my apologies in advance because I'm not a professional translator, but I'm his friend and I'll try to do my best. So what he said is that he started in musical journalism by chance because he wasn't a journalist whatsoever. He is an electronic engineer and he used to work with dialysis machines.
Aunque siempre, desde muy pequeñito, he estado relacionado con la música, siempre la veía desde fuera. Era, no sé si en inglés se dice un outsider. Y un día, de casualidad, viendo en la televisión un programa mítico de los años 80 que se hacía en España, que era La Edad de Oro, la Paloma Chamorro invitó a un grupo extrañísimo como The Residents.
When I was a child, I didn't pay much attention to music, but then I started to follow some TV shows. There was one very famous that it was called The Golden Age, presented by Paloma Chamorro, and he saw there a band called The Residents.
Pidió colaboradores que pudieran decir algo sobre esa banda y los invitó a los estudios de televisión de Madrid. Y fui allí, y allí conocí por casualidad a un periodista también bastante mítico en Sevilla, que es Luis Clemente, que le gustaba el mismo tipo de música extraña que a mí, vivía en el mismo barrio que yo, y sin embargo nos conocimos en Madrid.
In that TV show, they asked the audience to go to Madrid and to talk about music in general. And then there he met a then famous journalist called Luis Clemente, who was from the same neighborhood as him, but they met in Madrid, not in Seville. They met there talking about strange music, as they used to say.
Y como él sí era periodista musical y ya hacía radio, pues congeniamos, empecé a hacer radio con él y desde entonces, aunque la música nunca ha sido una parte profesional mía, sino sobre todo un hobby, aunque ha formado una parte fundamental, ¿no?, de mi vida, pues ya empecé a hacer radio, televisión, prensa musical, tanto especializada como la prensa establecida, ¿no? He hecho de todo en la música, aunque siempre de una forma no profesionalizada.
He was friend with Luis Clemente, and he started to collaborate with him in a radio show. And in the beginning was as a hobby, but he started to work in radio and TV and in written press and in general press, and he ended up writing in general press.
Okay, it's interesting that you mentioned the show was called Golden Age. Okay, no, because one of the questions I wanted to put some context to this debate, because I guess we decided to cover this topic because the whole sector has had quite some issues for the past decade or maybe 2 decades. Or I'm interesting to see your views on this. But yeah, the main question for now is when would you say the golden age of music journalism was? I guess you've all been involved in the business for many years, but from your personal perspective and experience, like when it comes to fees and also like to the importance in big media. When was the golden age?
I guess it was in the 80s and 90s. If we talk about fees and we talk about the possibility, for example, to travel to London, Paris, or Rome to interview a big star, nowadays it's almost impossible. I mean, it's like a utopia. We have to write for we are being paid as we are paid. I don't want to moan about it because we know how it's like. And it's complicated to envisage the future nowadays for music journalism. I mean, there is good journalism being made today. I think there are many good journalists nowadays, but I don't know how could we talk about some kind of golden age in the future.
Yo incluso la extendería un poquito antes, hasta por lo menos aquí en España, a mediados de los 70, cuando a partir de la...
He would extend the golden age to the mid-70s here in Spain.
Cuando a raíz de revistas como Vibraciones empezaron a descubrirnos un mundo nuevo a los aficionados a la música, y eso es lo que realmente define la edad de oro del periodismo, el que fuese capaz de enseñarte un mundo al que no podías llegar de otra manera, al contrario que ahora, que hay muchísimas formas y no todas son buenas.
In the mid-70s there was a magazine called Vibrations, and they discovered a new world to them, because they didn't have the chance to reach that music scene. So that's what he called that's what he calls the golden age, when a magazine could discover to you a new world.
I mean, I think the real cutoff. I mean, I'll start by saying I think if you asked music journalists in the 90s when was the golden age, they probably would have said the 80s or the 70s. And if you asked people in the 80s, they would have said the 70s and the 60s. I think music journalists have probably been complaining since the start of music journalism, just to be fair. But I think the real break point was once the internet became a daily part of everyone's lives. Because, I mean, and you could call it gatekeeping if you like, but it used to be the only way to access conversations with artists and bands was to read music journalism. Or the only way to find out about new records that were coming out, besides going out and buying them, was to read reviews that were happening in, the newspaper or magazines. So music journalists, used to have this power, but then once the internet came around and blogging, and it just kind of broke down those barriers, it's obviously really harmed the industry and made it a much more difficult job, at least if you want to make a living doing it.
Eso que dice es muy interesante, porque a mí, por ejemplo, me interesaría mucho saber, me pregunto ahora aquí, la gente que tiene 25 o 30 años o menos, ¿cómo definirían ellos la edad de oro de una prensa musical? Ellos que prensa musical prácticamente no han leído, no han vivido. Todo el acceso que han tenido a la prensa musical ha sido a través de Internet.
It's curious because what would you tell a guy in his 30s or 25, 30 years old, what is the golden age of journalism? Because everything they know is from Internet. So what would you tell them?
Okay, you already mentioned, Shawn, that basically the introduction of the internet was like a breakthrough point for music journalism and also, of course, for journalism as a whole and also other sectors. But maybe, could you guys maybe pinpoint like some of the most important changes that took place maybe since the early 2000s in terms of like maybe how we spread the content and maybe how we write about music also, like has the perspective changed due to like the different format and so on?
I think so. I think the main driving factor is the economic model around online journalism in general, music journalism included, where it used to be if you wanted to read about one band, you would see their name on the cover of the magazine and you would buy the whole magazine. And you'd be like, oh, well, I spent $5 on this, so I'll read the interview with the band I like, and I may as well flip through, and I'll read the reviews, and I'll read about these other bands, and you got this entire product. But then once things went online, and especially once social media came in, driving people to specifically, not to the front page of a website, but to a specific article, then the incentives changed. And it basically got to be like, what's going to attract people's attention? What's going to get people to click on the link on Facebook and then Twitter and now Instagram? And of course, with each successive social media platform, the number of clicks has gone down. And so now it's like the content is mostly existing on social media. So you have to boil it down to something that's 140 characters or one image on Instagram. And I think all those things have just created these weird incentives. So it's like, what's going to make people click? The most famous names that people already know, pop stars, sort of controversial stuff, anything that looks like gossip, just kind of fluff content. And all of that is just incentivized by the economic model of journalism and the delivery system that we all have for all kinds of content.
I absolutely agree with him. But I would say also that in Spain, for example, this has happened, especially in general media, in the last decades. I mean, music is never the main reason to write about music. You know, for example, in general papers, I can talk about El Mundo, El País, whatever, or even in the TV. When you talk about music, it's always linked to some kind of external aspect. I mean, gossip, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, couples which are broken, for example, Rosalía and Rauw Alejandro. I mean, there's never, it's never the music the main reason to write or to talk about music in the main media or in the general media. And furthermore, there's this controversy, we could say, with internet and with social media. I mean, the headline has to make an impact for people to click on it, and it conditionates everything you write about in music. I mean, not everything, but most of what you write. And I think that's the main difference from nowadays as from what it was 20 years ago.
Es verdad, a mí me condiciona totalmente el tener que trabajar para Internet, porque yo suelo escribir textos muy largos, es como siempre he trabajado, y en Internet es imposible que la gente preste atención. Coño, si normalmente cuando están escuchando canciones prácticamente ni las escuchan enteras y pasan rápidamente de una a otra, imaginaos si eso lo hacen escuchando canciones que no van a hacer leyendo sobre esas canciones.
Well, I'm really conditioned when I'm writing for the internet because I'm used to write long texts, and now imagine people don't take time to listen to a full song. So how are they going to take time to read a long text?
Y está también la inmediatez. Ahora mismo cualquier texto que se escriba se queda obsoleto, se queda viejo en un momento. Eso de tener una revista, comprar una revista y tener algo para leer durante todo un mes hasta que saliese el número siguiente es algo que ya la juventud, los consumidores de música, de prensa musical actual, ni se lo plantean siquiera.
I don't know what you say at the beginning. Yes, nowadays, well, back before people used to buy a magazine and had like a month to read it completely because until next month they wouldn't get another magazine. And now everything is immediacy. You write something and 10 seconds later is obsolete.
Okay. Well, since we're discussing about the way we write about music and how this has changed, another thing I wanted to ask you was the album review. And like me personally, when I started writing, when I started to work at Radio Student, the album review was the alpha and omega, like the main thing to basically learn and to work on. So maybe in the last 20 years, do you think that like the division between like album review and PR text has blurred a little? I mean, the lines have blurred a little bit. Or like what's the function of the album review today, basically? Because I do think that like the PR aspect has become more important maybe than the actual context of writing about certain musics.
I think it has the same importance nowadays, the album review, in my opinion, especially for artists. Even if they are releasing singles all the time, and EPs, and constantly present in social media, I mean, they have this. They still have this concept of the album as some kind of artistic piece of art. And it doesn't matter if they do trap or rock or pop or folk or whatever. I think, for example, for talking about people here in Spain, for example, for Rosalía or for Zetangana, it's absolutely essential to make a good album and to have this album reviewed on papers. I don't know if nowadays it's really separated from what you say, from PR, because it's difficult to ask people to write about something that they don't like if they are not going to be well paid, you know. Sometimes music journalism is becoming something like a hobby for many people, and I think this is degrading the profession. But I think album as a piece of art is still relevant for any kind of artist.
I think the content of album reviews has changed a lot. because they used to have this sort of utilitarian function. Like I was talking about before, people would read it as kind of like a buyer's guide of, is this album good? Should I actually spend my money and check it out? There was no Spotify to go to listen to everything before you made a decision about whether you like it or not. So, but in these days where everyone has access to almost all music and can make their own decisions, it kind of leaves album reviewers in a different position where instead of saying, oh, this song has a cool guitar solo and then the drums come in and kind of explaining what it sounds like, it's more about providing context. You know, what does this piece of art mean in this moment in time, in the context of what's happening in the larger scene in the world? This isn't my idea. I'm stealing this from someone I saw online, but I thought it was very smart. I almost feel like album reviews now aren't as much about reviewing the music as it is about reviewing the artist. And like, what do you think about this person as a creative force? And I think that's another reason that we're not seeing many negative reviews, because no one wants to write a review and say this is a bad person or this is a boring person. But there is something, like, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, this person has really interesting ideas, they have cool things to say. And so yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons we're seeing a lot more positive reviews.
Tiene razón en esto de las críticas positivas, igual que Carlos lo tenía en lo de que ahora las críticas no sirven tanto como servían antes, pero yo creo que una de las partes fundamentales es que porque estamos degradando muchísimo la crítica y ahora cualquier cosa que lees en diferentes medios siempre es lo mismo, porque prácticamente lo que hace el 90% de los críticos es un corte y pega de lo que te manda el propio artista o su agencia de management. Y lees lo mismo en cualquier medio que quieras leer.
He agrees with them because he thinks also that music press is degrading, because nowadays many journalists write the same because it's a copy-paste of what the management office sends to journalists. So you read always the same and it's very boring.
But would you say maybe that there's some fault also on the journalist side? Because, I mean, at least in Slovenia we have some people who are quite critical about like our criticism, because it's also like, maybe it's a different topic, like one is criticism, one is journalism, but focusing on criticism, would you also say that maybe one of the reasons that people are not keen on writing critical reviews is they get paid too little to be, I mean, to get the shit after, because maybe it's an extreme example, but we know examples of fans of Taylor Swift maybe attacking, like sending death threats to like journalists who get paid $100 for a review. So would you also say that maybe this is one of the reasons, that the backlash, the fear of the backlash?
I think so. I mean,
because also it's direct, because if you wrote a critical review in a magazine, you maybe would get a reply in the next magazine from the readership, but nowadays you get tagged on Twitter and really attacked.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an example. Like, I've written reviews for Pitchfork, you know, which is arguably one of the most important like music outlets in the world. They pay $150 for an album review, which, considering how long they want the reviews to be and how detailed it's supposed to be, it's not very much money. So you have to kind of do a calculus of like, if you're going to write a negative review, do you want to deal with all of the like Pitchfork readers plus all the fans of the artist, like seeing your review maybe out of context and then making you like their number one enemy on the internet for the next few days? It's really not fun. And then also the fact that artists themselves can find you on Twitter and then message you and be like, you're an idiot, or post your review and be like, this journalist, tag your name, says my album sucks, tell them what you think, or journalists are shit, they're just jealous of us anyways. Like, this stuff happens a lot, actually. And it's funny because it even happens amongst like, quote unquote, like independent artists that are supposed to respect and care about music journalists. But I mean, artists are very sensitive and they use these tools of the internet like everyone else, and things get petty. And I'm like, if I'm getting paid $150, was this really worth it for me just to say like, oh, this album's not very good? Usually not. Like I'd have to be very passionate about how bad it is to write that.
Yeah, you are right, but I think anyway that you have to, I mean, whatever you are paid, you have to be true to yourself and to be honest with what you are hearing or watching. I've suffered twice in this sense, two situations. For example, one of them was with Lana Del Rey, not with Lana Del Rey, with Lana Del Rey fans. I mean, it was in 4 years ago in Benicàssim Festival. I was covering the festival for El País, and my headline was Lana Del Rey aburre a las piedras. Lana Del Rey is boring even stones. I mean, it was, and I was. Many people the day afterwards were searching in my profile, in my Instagram profile, in my Twitter profile, in my Facebook profile, telling me any kind of insults. But you have to live with it. Another one was with a DJ, Armin van Buuren, in Valencia when he played about 6 years ago, and there were many angry fans the day afterwards. It was the same, writing for El País, some kind of review about his DJing in Valencia. And it's a bit, I mean, it's not grateful. It's something but it's not something that really distresses me. I think something that you have to live with.
Yo creo que prácticamente eso lo hemos vivido todos los que hemos hecho alguna vez críticas de música. Yo diferenciaría de todas maneras esto de tener que sufrir el acoso de los que te leen en dos medios diferentes. En la prensa generalista, por lo menos cuando me pasa a mí, que escribo en las dos, en la generalista y en la especializada, cuando escribo algo en la prensa generalista y la gente empieza a mandar muchos comentarios y a meterse mucho conmigo, realmente me da igual, porque en esa prensa las secciones de comentarios son semilleros de basura, de gente que realmente no entiende sobre lo que has escrito y bueno, y ahí hay unas confrontaciones que te da igual en realidad lo que digan.
He distinguishes between when someone is commenting in general press or on the internet. In general press, in those articles and comments, people are writing and they don't really understand about music. So it's like a dumpster. They throw all the trash there. So he doesn't care in general press, those comments.
I want to add one thing, is that we're living in a time where more music has been released than any time in history. Like the day that the most music was released ever was today. And the second most was yesterday. And it just keeps going up. So because of that, the job of a music journalist becomes like being a kind of filter in a way. And because of that, I think that's another reason you're seeing less negative reviews, because it's one thing if it's like Lana Del Rey or some big artist that everyone's talking about. That makes sense to like provide like some critical commentary. Is this as good or bad as their previous thing? But if we're talking about like smaller artists or indie bands that most people haven't heard of, is there really a point of being like, hey, this band you've never heard of, they really suck? When there are infinite options that are good. Like there's so much good music that comes out every week that I don't even have the space to write about it. So why am I going to take my time to punch down at some artist who's trying to make it that no one's ever heard of just so I can be like, oh yeah, they're actually bad, don't bother. Like,
yeah, I think you're right. But on the other hand, I mean, if we just write about what we like, it's complicated also because people would think that the world is plenty of masterpieces. It cannot be like that. That's the other. And I would say, furthermore, most of the fans of any kind of band understand your job. I mean, I was talking about Lana Del Rey fans, for example, but most of the fans understand what you are doing and understand the critic.
Y luego, además, Es que se produce la paradoja de que ahora mismo, con tal bombardeo de novedades, de bandas nuevas, de discos nuevos que tenemos, precisamente los que se dedican a hablar de ellos se quejan de que hay demasiado donde elegir y no saben sobre qué hablar.
There's a paradox that now that you have so new material every day, those that they are writing about that material, they are complaining about how many things they are.
Por eso es tan importante y lleva tanta razón lo que dijo él antes, de que con todo lo que tienes para hablar, ¿por qué coño te vas a poner a hablar de alguien que no te importa o que no te gusta? Entonces, por eso también se producen tantas críticas positivas, porque escribes precisamente de lo que más te ha llamado la atención y más te ha gustado.
Since you have so many things to write about, why on earth would you write about something that you don't like? You just write about something that you like.
But sometimes it's funny to write about something that you hate. It's even funnier than something that is regular.
Well, I wasn't planning to do this question, but I thought about it now. I would also argue that maybe music journalists and music fans and musicians tend to romanticize the role of music in the 21st century, because it really used to be like maybe the most important aspect of culture, or of like popular culture, maybe in the 80s, 90s, even in the early 2000s. But nowadays it has like a lot of other contenders for your attention. So we have the platform economy and like platforms like Netflix and so on, and you have influencer culture, and we have gaming, which is, I guess, one of the biggest opponents to music, especially amongst the younger generation. So would you also argue, would you maybe say that music journalists need to change their optic, like their perspective on the importance of maybe music? Because it's, on the one hand, like people are still love music as much as they loved it 2,000 or 10,000 years ago, but their attention has to be split between different options.
I mean, I think people in general are just overwhelmed with content. And that includes music, gaming, movies, TV shows, Netflix, just the news. You know, we have so much more news than we used to have. So, and people are working longer and longer hours on top of that. So how much time can anyone devote to one piece of music, especially in the face of infinite options? Like lots of times I refer to this thing called the fire hose, and it just feels like we're all being hit with a fire hose. So that doesn't mean that music journalists should think their job isn't important, but it does explain why I think the audience has shrunk quite a bit. And I mean, I'm going to steal another quote that someone told to me, but like music journalism kind of used to be for everyone because everyone was listening to music. Now music journalism is more for fans of music journalism, and that's a much smaller pool of people in the world. Because a lot of people, music is just background. It's what you put on when you're cooking dinner. It's what you put on when you're driving to the grocery store. And they don't need to read a review, or they don't care about an interview with the artist. But for the small group of people that really do want to get into the nitty-gritty details, that's who we're sort of writing for, but it is a smaller pool.
Yeah, I think music has lost its cultural relevance in this century, it's clear. And people has less time to spend on it, but it's true what you said, that we can act as some kind of filter. I mean, if someone discovers any kind of new artist because he or she has been reading any review of mine, I think it's what makes our job still important. Apart from the writing style and the complexity of the text, I mean. So, but in any case, I mean, it's the way in which we consume music nowadays is completely different, and the cultural relevance for young people nowadays is completely different also.
Pues ya lo han dicho ellos dos. A mí es que realmente no me cabe en la cabeza por qué la música es uno de los aspectos de la cultura básica que se queda tan atrás. La música es un componente fundamental de la cultura y de la identidad de un país. Entonces, la prensa musical especializada debería ser una de las más seguidas por la gente.
he doesn't understand how music is getting behind other aspects of cultural interests of people. It should be more important, even defines the identity of a country. So music press should be as important when you're talking about general press, and it isn't.
La prensa musical, la música debería ser tan importante para la prensa como lo es para el ocio de la gente. Y realmente parece que no es así.
Music press should be as important in press as music is important in people's leisure, but it's not like that.
Okay, what about maybe your perspective on the ideal music journalist, or like what are the skills and the qualities which define a good journalist or a good writer from your point of view? And a follow-up question, could you maybe provide some good recent examples of excellent music journalism? I have one. It's Shawn's book, First Floor, so I'm gonna do some plugging. If you're interested in electronic music, he has a really good book of essays on electronic music and clubbing and the contemporary culture. So yeah, do you also have some plugs?
I mean, most of the music journalism that I read, to be honest, is focused on electronic music. Anyone who's an electronic music fan surely knows the work of people like Philip Sherburne or Chal Ravens or Gabriel Zatan. If you want a more historical perspective, someone like Simon Reynolds. I mean, none of these names are like particularly obscure, I will admit. I think what makes a lot of these people good is a combination of knowledge, preferably knowledge that they've acquired firsthand by participating in music scenes, you know, going to shows or even filling other roles sometimes, and combining that with like sort of a authentic personal voice. Like I like to feel like I have maybe it's like a parasocial relationship, but I like to feel like I'm getting to know someone and can understand their perspective while I'm reading it. And maybe this isn't very journalistic in the sense of, journalists historically are supposed to be unbiased and keep themselves out of the narrative. But I feel like in today's world, like journalists that tend to make the most impact are the ones that sort of put themselves in a little bit, not just writing about themselves, but like where you can tell they have a point of view that belongs to them, that's specific to their own history with the music and the culture. And I think all the names that I mentioned do that.
Yeah, I think I personally, what I like the most in music journalism, apart from what you said, which I completely agree, is this kind of journalists who tend to write about many different styles and many different scenes, which is not something usual. And apart from it, the ones that tend to connect, to make the social or socio-cultural connections between music and its context. I mean, it's not easy, but I think this is one of the main challenges that we should be able to face, to link, to trace these connections between music and society. Because I think that's a tool to connect also with a wider range of readers. It's not easy, but it's the kind of journalist that I like the most, you know. And I agree with you in what you say about the journalist being part of the tale, we could say, because nowadays, in which we tend to follow particular profiles more than particular media or particular papers, I like this personal point of view, and I like to read journalists who are implicated in what they are talking about.
Es verdad, yo estoy muy de acuerdo con lo que ha dicho Carlos. El periodista no debe ser, obviamente tiene que ser objetivo, pero sobre todo debe ser subjetivo. Debe hablar de lo que piensa él y para hacerlo así tiene que vivir de la música, tiene que ir a los conciertos, a los locales de ensayo, a los bares con los músicos. Tienes que conocer al músico para después poder transmitirle a la gente algo que realmente interese y sea verdadero.
he agrees with Carlos. You need to be there. You need to go to rehearsal rooms, to shows, to know the artist, so you can transmit what they're trying to say. You shouldn't be objective. You should be subjective to give your point of view.
Y por supuesto lo que tiene que también es tener una buena capacidad de transmitir lo que realmente quiere decir. Tiene que saber escribir bien y tiene que ser, pues, no sé si divertido, pero por lo menos escribir con interés.
And he should have the ability to write properly, to transmit what he wants to say with interest and being also fun, not boring.
I think people sometimes tend to think about objectivity and ask journalists to be objective, but what a journalist should be is not exactly objective. It's I think it's equanime in English. How do you say equanimity? Equanime. Equanimus?
Equanimity.
Equanime en inglés, ¿cómo se dice? I mean, it's like being honest with yourself. I mean, I don't know how exactly to explain it, but it's not exactly objective. I could say it's objective with your subjectivity, more or less. I would say.
Okay, I have another more hypothetical question, maybe. But if you had the chance, like, to set up a new music platform or something, what would be like your ideal form? Would you maybe model it on the like late 70s and 80s magazines, like the big players, or like what's your like the ideal format for music journalism in the 21st century?
If money is not an option, I mean, that's the hard part, because it's like, it's great to say like, oh, I would love to have a magazine that only has thoughtful long reads and 5,000 word interviews and 3,000 word essays that go really in depth. The problem is no one's going to read that. I mean, not no one, but certainly not enough people to sustain a publication that's paying journalists a living wage and can keep the lights on for more than a couple of months without investment dollars or brand partnerships and stuff like this. So, sorry, I don't mean to like rain all over your question, but the hardest part about the industry right now is like there's no functional economic model to support quality, in-depth journalism. And as long as that's the case, until like a new model can be found that doesn't feel like advertorial, because that seems to be the only thing keeping a lot of places afloat these days, it's going to be really hard to do something ideal. But yes, I would love to have that thing I talked about at the beginning, long form, nice, detailed, experienced writers. That'd be great.
It's really complicated. I think that there's a kind of model in magazines in Spain, but for example, talk about some issues, but not in a direct way. For example, Panenka in football, it's a football magazine addressed to the kind of people who maybe mostly interested in football, but it's not necessary. It's not strictly necessary. I mean, Tapas, for example, it's a magazine in Spain which doesn't talk just about food, and I think in Spain maybe could work something like that. I've been involved in a magazine similar to that one. It's really hard to make it grow, but I think that could be the model, one possible model, because it's obvious that the traditional model is not really viable nowadays. I grew up reading magazines in the 90s that nowadays are now converted into websites or directly went away.
Yo no sé cómo se hace, desde luego, pero yo lo primero que haría sería convertir a Internet en un modelo viable de negocio. Porque es que, de nuevo, se produce otra paradoja como la que dije antes, que es que siendo Internet el medio más importante y las revistas ya prácticamente, las revistas en papel, estar prácticamente desaparecidas, se sigue dando la circunstancia de que muchas empresas, muchos medios, solamente te pagan si tu texto aparece impreso en papel. Si lo haces solamente para Internet, olvídate de que te lo paguen.
He says that first of all, we should look how to make profitable the internet press, the digital press, because there is another paradox that nowadays everybody is consuming a music press on the internet, but you are not paid if you don't publish in paper. If you only publish digital, you are not paid. But people are reading you on the internet, so that's a paradox.
I mean, one thing that I think is interesting is like you have to find readers where they are, and readers are online right now, and music consumers are online. But it's really hard to do something of quality on a format like Instagram or a format like Twitter. One, I think, sort of untapped space, especially for new music, is podcasts. And I think a lot of that comes down to licensing. Like, if you make a podcast about music, you can't put music in it unless you get the licensing permission, and unless you have a huge budget, that's probably not going to be possible. And I think because of that, music podcasting feels really far behind other kinds of podcasting. I don't know how to solve that without making copyright law a lot less complicated, but if someone could figure it out, or if some platform could come along besides Spotify that would let people make music podcasts, I think that's an area for potential growth.
What about maybe other formats, like maybe the YouTube album review? We saw like the rise of the needle drop, and maybe TikTok is another field we haven't touched upon, but I guess we're all a bit out of touch. Also me.
We're all too old for TikTok. Everyone on the panel.
No, but would you maybe argue that music journalism also has to step up a little bit in terms of like getting in touch with the current technologies and current new formats, because like people don't tend to read, like as you said, the long form pieces. So would you maybe say that we should also try to find different approaches in how to cover music?
And we spend so much time with our social media also. I mean, it's something that you invest time in, and you are not being paid for it. I mean, if you have to think about new formats, TikTok, etc., it becomes a huge amount of work. I don't know how to. I wouldn't know how to say it.
I mean, if you think about the break in music journalism between before and after MTV, like before, when it was just people writing and on the radio, they could look like, a troll under a bridge, but still write about music or talk on the radio. But then once MTV came and there was like VJs, they had to be like attractive and cool. And now that's kind of the position that music journalists are being put in, of like, oh, well, why aren't you on YouTube? Why aren't you on TikTok? And it's like, I don't want to think about my outfit when I'm talking about music. I don't want to have to get a camera set up at home. And I mean, that's me, but I do think that probably the people running these publications need to start thinking about these things and maybe try and create models where they have it sort of in-house and can create this content in a way that's both good and palatable for younger audiences. They also need to spend time developing younger journalists, which is kind of completely fallen by the wayside over the last 20 years. I keep waiting. I'm like, where's the 27-year-old writing about the same stuff that I am, that I'm really excited about what they're doing, and they have a really interesting voice. I feel like the industry's become so, like, it's degraded to such a level that there's not a lot of young people sort of learning the ropes and like coming to take my job, which is weird. Like, there should be more people trying to take my job.
Es verdad, vamos. Tengo unos compañeros que todo lo que dicen lo suscribo perfectamente, porque vuelvo a decir lo que decía antes, que todo se resume en que habría que hacer de Internet un modelo económico viable, que realmente a la gente que escribe en cualquier plataforma que salga por Internet tiene que poder ver la compensación económica.
He agrees with all of them and insists in that you should make internet on an economic business. So if you write for an online platform, you should be rewarded.
Y él ha hablado además de otra cosa muy importante, es de que no hay un recambio generacional para los periodistas que tenemos ya 40, bueno, para los que tienen 40, yo tengo ya 65, bueno. Os pongo un ejemplo, mira, ayer mismo me estuvo llamando la directora de la Agencia Cultural Andaluza porque están haciendo un ciclo musical en Cádiz y no están vendiendo muchas entradas. Los jóvenes que llevan el sistema de promoción digital no lo están haciendo bien y quería que yo escribiese algo para el periódico de Cádiz, igual que lo hago para el de Sevilla, por eso no lo puedo hacer para el de Cádiz, pero quería que yo escribiese algo para el de Cádiz porque encontraba que era el único que hay que lo podía hacer. Y eso no puede ser, porque Sevilla es grandísima y Andalucía ya ni te digo.
There isn't a new generation of journalists, so it's difficult to find someone to do what he does, and he's 60. And he puts an example that the other day, the director of an Andalusian agency needed to do some festival in Cádiz, which is nearby Seville, and they wouldn't find anybody to do it. No young people were interested in doing that, and they asked him to do that, and he's 60.
There's much more people wanting to be photographer or promoter than journalist, I mean.
But would you say, is there something we could do about it, or are we doomed forever?
I mean, I think the main thing is paying a living wage. I've written a lot about this in my own work, but Resident Advisor is like the biggest electronic music publication in the world. Earlier this year, they published a full-time editorial position in their London office, you know, London, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and it paid £24,000 a year, which in London is like a poverty-level wage. And it's like, if you're in your mid-20s, like even if you're a young person, how long are you going to be able to work at that salary without burning out and feel like this is not worth it? So, like, it sounds not to oversimplify things, but it does start with just paying enough. Also, because it's like, to be a music journalist, especially an international one, I gotta say, you have to live in a major metropolitan center. Like, the biggest music journalism cities in the world are London, New York, Berlin, Los Angeles. These places are very expensive, and if you have to be there to do the job, like, then you need to get paid enough so that you can live and make it be worthwhile.
Yeah, sometimes we feel like we are in the worst part of the business, because, for example, in Spain, Spain is a perfect place for music festivals, for big music festivals, because of its climate, because of the amount of money that musicians get when they play here, the promoters, but it's not a good place for music journalism, on the other hand. So something fails there, and that's some kind of paradox, we could say. And I think that we are in the worst part of this business.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Barcelona, which is home to Primavera Sound and Sonar, like the two biggest festivals, maybe, in two of the biggest festivals in Europe. And there's hardly any music journalists in the whole city of note. Like, if you people ask me all the time, like, oh, who are the best music journalists? And I have like a few names to list, but it's really strange. Like, it shouldn't be like that, but we're just not developing this sort of wider roster of music journalists.
Es la verdad de todo. Hay que pagarle a la gente, porque si no es imposible que se dedique seriamente a esto. Y mucha de la culpa la tienen también estos que empiezan a ser periodistas, que aceptan trabajar de becarios sin contraprestaciones alguna, o los que se dedican a hacer críticas de concierto solamente aceptando en pago la entrada al concierto porque le gusta el músico, o los que hacen críticas de disco aceptando en pago solamente que le den el disco, algo que además ahora ya se está acabando porque ya ni te mandan el disco siquiera, como ya está todo en Spotify y en Internet. Pues eso, ellos mismos son los que deben darse a valer.
You should pay people, but you have to also blame those so-called journalists that they accept working for free, or even for a show ticket or for a CD. Well, not now, but they used to pay with CDs, and now they accept to do their job for free. And you should begin by avoiding that.
Well, or the people who make a website just to get into the festivals. I mean, we make a website, we write about music, whatever, and we get into the festivals for free. That's very usual.
I actually see this a lot with electronic music websites. A lot of them have really stripped back their content offerings, probably because they just don't have very much money. But then it turns out that like 50% of their content is festival reviews. And it's obvious that they're just using the fact that they have a website to get free trips to festivals, which, I mean, good for them, I guess, but it's hurting the industry as a whole.
Okay, and now to end maybe on a more positive note, do you have any tips maybe for young aspiring journalists in the audience, or maybe following us online, in terms of how to struggle in this quite problematic sector?
I mean, my main advice to young journalists these days is find another job to pay your bills. But I mean that, I don't mean quit music journalism. I mean, if you're hoping to get a full-time staff position at a publication writing about music, you're probably not going to find one, and if you do, they're going to expect you to be churning out clickbait. You know, you need to write 10 stories a day that we can post on our website, and we also want you to run our social media, and it's just, you're going to burn out and hate music. So find something else that, that is just a regular job, that when the job's over, you can turn that part of your life off, and then write in your spare time about things you're passionate about, and then build up your name that way, and then ideally over time you'll get better paid jobs, and then maybe you can cut down to a part-time job and do journalism. And that's my main advice, because otherwise you're gonna have a really hard time.
Yeah, I've been combining this what do you say? I mean, I've been working in some jobs that had nothing to do with journalism, and then afterwards I was writing. Nowadays, in the last 10 years, I live just by journalism, but not just by journalism. I mean, I write texts for promoters, for example, or I'm involved in communication tasks. So I think it's almost impossible to live just by writing reviews and interviews and reports, but you can use your skills to be a bit more versatile and to diversify your job, writing for promoters, for websites, for example, in advertisements, campaigns, for example. I don't know, but you can do it. I mean, you can do it, and I still think, call me optimistic, that this is the most beautiful job I could do. I don't know if many people think that in their 20s or their 30s, but I still think that.
Ese ha sido mi caso también, solo que yo cuando me he podido dedicar más profesionalmente, digamos, a la prensa musical, ha sido cuando ya me he jubilado de mi trabajo principal y vivo una segunda juventud, digamos.
That was my case. I started to work as a professional journalism when I retired from my life job, so now I'm living off that.
Entonces, una cosa muy importante que deberían tener en cuenta los jóvenes, los que se dedican ahora a escribir, antes ya he dicho que hay que vivir la escena musical, hay que salir, hay que relacionarse con la música y con el entorno musical, pero si no pueden, porque no tienen medios o no quieren hacerlo y se quedan en su casa, al menos que desde su casa busquen cosas nuevas, cosas atractivas, cosas singulares para ellos, que no se limiten a escribir y a reproducir solamente lo que le mandan los propios artistas y las agencias de management, que es el principal mal que tiene la prensa musical ahora mismo.
As I said before, young people should go to concerts, to shows, to see what is happening. But if they can't do it, or if they won't do it, just do it at home. You can research, you can look what people are doing. They have ways to do it. Don't just copy what you read of other people, just look your own voice.
Okay, I think we have a few more minutes for questions from the audience, if there's any, maybe, in the back. Do you have a mic there, or? No? Okay. If not, I'd like to thank José Miguel, Carlos, and Shawn for a very insightful debate, and thank you all for coming.
Like that, head out of the